Here, nerds, we are going to walk through some watercolor techniques, and I got several to show you, but they're all quite easy, so let's just get started. Now, the first one is a very simple one called a flat wash, and what it means to be a flat wash, we mean even wash, meaning that there is the same amount of pigment all the way across the area. So reload your brush to get as much pigment as possible to keep it nice and even across the whole thing. And that's all there is really to it, to a flat wash. Now, it is a little bit different than something we call a graded wash. And when we have a graded wash, I'm going to clean up my brush real quick. Okay, when we have a graded wash, we are actually creating a gradual shift in color. So you're creating value. Okay, so I'm going to start right here, and I'm just going to go start at the top, and I'm not going to reload my brush. I'm going to get some more water here because I kind of ran out. Okay, and I'm going to go all the way across my paper, and notice that as I run lower on water, I also kind of run out of that pigment too, okay? And it got lighter and lighter as I kept going. Now, graded wash can also mean to blend two colors together. So I'm actually going to snag some blue here. I'm going to start at the other end and blend them with each other while my paint is still wet. Now that is extremely important if you want it to be a nice graded wash, and you make sure both paints are wet when it's happening, okay? And that's all there is to it, to a graded wash. Now, these next ones, okay, we have wet on wet and wet on dry, okay? And the difference between the two of them is that, you know, I guess it's right in the name. We're actually going to start with sort of like a flat wash kind of thing going on here. You can also do this technique with a graded wash. So with our wet on wet, it means that I have wet paint, okay, like this yellow paint I have here, nice and wet, and I am going to be painting on it with another thing of wet paint, okay? Now you notice that when I apply that green paint, okay, since my yellow is still wet, it bleeds together, okay? Sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes it's not what you had in mind, okay? And if you don't want to have this bleeding happening where the colors blend together because they're following the water, okay, you want to do something called a wet on dry, okay? So I'm going to bring over, I have my yellow once again, and I'm going to add that same green stripe, but this time you'll notice it's a little bit different where my green doesn't bleed into my yellow. It kind of sits on top of it, okay? So I want you guys to really see the difference between these two techniques, okay? When your paint is wet, it bleeds together with whatever's right next to it or right on top of it. So keep that in mind while you work with watercolors. Now, the next one that we're going to be talking about is dry brush. So I'm actually going to switch brushes here because this one is a wet brush, okay? So I'm going to switch to a dry brush. And all it really means for a dry brush technique is you are taking a dry brush and you are getting some paint on it and you are brushing on your paper, okay? Now, notice how I had some part of it was a little bit wetter, okay? That depends on how much water you have in your pan of color. And sometimes it's nicer to have less water, okay? And it ends up being more of a goo, I guess you'd want to call it. But that's all there is really to it, to a dry brush. And dry brush can be really fun and nice for if you're trying to do something like grass or some kind of interesting texture on your watercolor painting, okay? So next we're going to play around with some materials that create some really fun techniques when you're working with watercolor. And I'm going to get some orange on here. Ooh, let's get some yellow going on. Okay, these are kind of nice when they blend together. Pretty. Okay, so I'm just starting off with a graded wash just because you don't have to, okay? I just thought it'd be really fun. Get some more orange there. Get some more yellow. Sweet. Okay. And this technique is called the salt method, okay? And what happens basically is you have wet paint and you put salt on top of it while it is still wet. Now you can use regular table salt like I got here, or you can use more of a coarser salt that also works. And what ends up happening is it kind of displaces your color. So the color almost like gets soaked up by the salt and then leaves kind of rings and little speckles behind once it is dry. Now, wait until it's 100% dry and then you're able to rub off the salt afterwards. Don't do it sooner because then you kind of lose your technique. All right, we'll set that aside. Next, we got some plastic wrap. Okay, so I'm going to start off with getting my paper wet again with some cool colors. So let's get some blue. Okay, and maybe some purple in there. Almost like a galaxy. There we go. Swirl that together nice. Beautiful. All right, so with this technique, all you need is a hunk of plastic wrap, and I've seen that people have used like a wax paper too. Both of them, they do similar yet slightly different techniques. But all you do is you take your plastic wrap and you kind of scrunch it up a little bit. You don't want to have it completely in a ball, but scrunch it up a little bit, and then you're going to press it on your wet, okay, wet paint, okay. And you can kind of see what it's doing a little bit. It creates some sort of interesting, weird kind of texture. I kind of like it. And there are always some fun places to include that in your paintings. But wait until it dries, and then you're able to take that plastic wrap off. There you go. That's all there is to that one. All right. So the next one is the resist method, okay? And with the resist method, you actually can use a bunch of different types of materials. Basically, what you're doing is you are putting some sort of material on your paper so then it resists the watercolor and keeps watercolor from going to that space, okay? And you can do that with an oil pastel, or you actually can do it with tape. I actually did tape on this one, which I tore the masking tape off. That also works. And then there's also some fancy materials like masking fluid, which can do some really cool stuff. Anyways, I'm going to get some color on here because I already did some resist with my oil pastels ahead of time, and you paint over it and it reveals whatever you had left underneath. Pretty cool. I like it. All right, and then the last one that I have to share with you is not really a technique. Well, I guess it's, you know, kind of a technique. I often use it for when I make mistakes when I do my art making stuff. So I'm going to show you kind of what it looks like and what I'm talking about here. So I'm going to start off with some color in the background just for funsies. There we go. Beautiful. Okay. And it's actually something called the lift off technique, okay? And oftentimes we use this technique like if we got paint in the wrong spot and we want to kind of clean it up a little bit, and you actually just take like something that's absorbent like a paper towel or a cotton swab or a cotton ball, and you lift off some of the color. Okay, and this is kind of reminiscent of the plastic wrap, how it kind of looks kind of crunchy when I use my paper towel. You see how it's lifting off that color. And this can be really helpful if if you're for mistake wise, if you made a mistake, so it can kind of make the color a little bit lighter. It makes it easier to hide later on. Okay, but that's all there is really to that technique. Anyways, yeah, I hope that these techniques help you with your watercolor art making. That's all I got for you.